Chase Thomas podcast. My nephew needs me to record. See, I already hate it. I hate it.
All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ over there in Mississippi, SuperTalk, Mississippi. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite radio personalities, and we're friends of the state of Mississippi on this very program, even with Everything School HQ in the Tennessee locale here. Matt Wyatt, friend of the show, been on a lot, and he does great work over there in Mississippi. And Mississippi, it's baseball time, so Mississippi, it's all kind of we can as of right now. Hey, you got your rings. I don't care. Like until Tennessee gets a ring, I'm not going to feel any sympathy on this side of things. But it's Brian. Hey, Dad. Brian, good afternoon, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well, Chase. Thanks for having me on. I don't know that I would have agreed to this interview if I'd known you were a Falcons fan. I'll be totally honest with you.
Well, I'm from Atlanta originally, so that is part of this.
I would have made you do the interview at 3:28.
Wow.
Yeah, I would have just gone right there. So.
How's Derek Carr going?
We deferred some money on him this year so we can get back under the cap. That's how it works in New Orleans.
Okay. That was pretty good. I mean, there was a game. What was it? There was like a pass interference, or there was something where a guy ran into. Did it involve a team that it was an important playoff game?
I've blacked that out.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. Good to know. Good to know, sir. I love it right out of the gate here. But I wanted to talk to you today because I think one of the more under the radar head coaching hires of this cycle was Jeff Lebby, because depending on who you read and who you talk to about Oklahoma and what those fans felt about Jeff Lebby as their OC, it was mixed this past year. And this, when college football fans, offenses, I mean, we just dealt with this past year with Heupel and company, where fans just love to pinpoint the OC. It's like, oh, well, Golish is gone. So clearly there's a drop off, and that's why Tennessee's offense isn't scoring at the pace that they were 2 years ago. And last year, Lebby was the target, where it's like, oh, Oklahoma's offense up and down, and he kind of struggles. It was just Lebby was getting a lot of heat. But Lebby has had great offenses just about everywhere he's gone. The guy knows football. The guy knows the state of Mississippi, the South, coached all around the region, obviously, friend of Heupel's and that area. So I'm very interested in terms of how Lebby fits and how it will ultimately work as a big swing back to the Mississippi State of old after the 1 year Zach Arnett experience. But my first question to you, is Lebby a long-term answer for Mississippi State, similar to how Dan Mullen was when he came in? Or do you think this is a couple years thing?
That's the thing with Mississippi State, right? That's a program that when coaches have success there in football, that you're always going to be like, well, they might be looking to make a move to a bigger program. And with Mullen, you face that basically every year he was there after year two. His first year after that, they were like, okay, let's let him get his feet wet a little bit. After State, in his second year, they were finishing the top 15. It became a yearly thing of you're going to have to face that. So the same will be true of Lebby if he is successful. If let's say State this year is able to get to 6-6 and go back to a bowl game, I think that would be a successful year. If next season he has a great portal class and puts this team at an 8-win status, big jobs are going to come calling. He has the resume as an offensive coordinator. Everywhere he's been, they've put points on the board. He looks the part of a good recruiter. State's recruiting efforts early under him have been pretty good. His name will definitely be thrown out there for some big jobs. The good news for Mississippi State is being a member of the SEC. With the money that entails, State has money to play with. Their collective is in good shape. They can offer. He's making 4.5 now. My guess is State could go up to 8 or 9 by the time you want to go to 8 or 9. I'm not saying next year, but I'm saying if he goes 6-6, 8-4, then let's say they do really well. He goes 9-3 in year 3, and he wants to look at get a $7-8 million salary. State can do that. So they're going to have to fight that battle, obviously, and they do that with every football coach they have that has success. But you just got to make this job as attractive as possible, and I think Mississippi State does a pretty good job at that.
Is he coming in with the same kind of fanfare Mullen had, where that same kind of optimism of the offensive guy who can do more with less? Is it that same kind of feel to you?
There is something to that, with Mullen. He came in after Sylvester Croom had been here for 5 years, and it was 5 years of some of the most putrid offensive football you'll ever see.
Yeah.
I mean, Croom famously in 5 years never scored 40 points in a game, never, not one
Really?
time. Yeah. And Mullen's first game, they went over 40. And so it was just like, okay, it was like a breath of fresh air. It's only been the 1 year with Arnett last year. Before the year prior, State won 9 games. They finished ranked in the top 20. Now, offensively, they weren't great. And people forget that. Mike Leach's teams here obviously ran the air raid and they piled up a lot of passing yardage. But as far as putting points on the board and being a dynamic offense, they weren't that. But last year was a huge step back. So yeah, there is some excitement, and there's a whiff of Mullen to all this, even in terms of when Mullen arrived at State that year. Ole Miss was ranked in the top 10 nationally. They were coming off of a Cotton Bowl season. There was a lot of hype around them. Very similar situation with Ole Miss this year. People think that's going to be a playoff team. They probably will be a playoff team when you look at their schedule. So there's some hope that Jeff Lebby can come in here and turn the tide and get Mississippi State back on equal footing, where they haven't been. Even though they won the Egg Bowl 2 seasons ago, Ole Miss as a program has had a little bit more of a national presence than Mississippi State has over the past few years.
Yeah, and it's funny, like Kiffin obviously doing something that hasn't been done ever at Ole Miss, back-to-back 10-win seasons, and he's got this thing humming. And like you said, it looks like they're going to have another 10-win season at Ole Miss. So does that help or hurt Jeff Lebby in this early part of his tenure, that Ole Miss is already cooking and that fans understand that, like, hey, Ole Miss is in a different place than Mississippi State is right now? Or are they like, hey, we need to catch Ole Miss because we've watched Lane Kiffin dominate this state for the last 3 years?
It very much is the latter there. That Mississippi State fans aren't going to settle for being second best to Ole Miss.
Yeah.
And Dan Mullen understood that when he arrived. The first thing he did was talk about the rivalry and how we got to be the number 1 team in the state. I say this a lot, that because you get some Ole Miss fans who say, there's not that the rivalry is not that big a deal. You can't be number 1 in the nation if you're not number 1 in the state. And that's how I look at things. So if you're not the best, look at Auburn.
Yeah.
They can't be the number 1 team in the nation when they're not the number 1 team in the state. So for Mississippi State fans, I think by and large there's an air of patience this year, right? Everybody knows that Ole Miss is loaded. They had a huge transfer portal class. They bring back Jackson Dart and a lot of those players. And Kiffin has been there for 5 years. He's built that program up. He's got them going in the right direction. Your hope is that in year 1 you can take a small step forward. You can be competitive with everybody in the SEC, that you can show that offensively you're going to be what Jeff Lebby has been at every other stop. You don't want to have him come in and State winning games on defense. I always thought that was one of the issues with Leach, and why people were slow to embrace him sometimes, was that when you hire Mike Leach, you think, okay, well, they'll lose some games, but they'll lose 45-42. And State was losing games like 21-3 in his first year. And that's not what you expect when you hire an offensive coach. In year 2, you want to see State take a big step forward. Ole Miss next season, if we're going to look way ahead, should take a step back. They're going to lose Dart. They're going to lose a lot of their skill position guys. A lot of their transfers are seniors and 1-year guys. So next year they should take a step back to be a 7-8 win team, and you hope in that year maybe you can catch up with them a little bit. This year, if you're caught up with Ole Miss, it's going to be really disappointing in Oxford and really exciting in Starkville. But I will say this: last year State was terrible. That's the best Ole Miss team in maybe ever.
Yeah,
and they only beat State by 10 here in Starkville in a game that was it was 10-7 going into the fourth quarter. So
missed field goals changed some stuff there too. Yeah.
Maybe the 2 teams aren't that as far away as perception would make you think. But that being said, I think in year 1 it really is sort of baby steps. Get back to a bowl game for Mississippi State. That's the goal. That seems realistic.
What have you heard from fans is the most exciting part of the hire for Lebby?
The offense. I mean, Mississippi State has just never been a program that's put spectacular offense out there. Mullen, when he arrived his first year, you were like, wow, this offense is great. But then you found out it was a good offense. It was perfectly capable of winning you plenty of games, but was it an explosive, exciting, get down the field, play with tempo kind of offense that you see the top college programs doing these days? No, it wasn't. It was very much a ball control offense. They ran the football. They threw it a lot Dak's senior year, but I think I've always thought that was more just to show the NFL that, hey, he can throw the football, and obviously that worked out. But he went right back to more of a power game the last 2 years he was at Mississippi State. They bring in Joe Moorhead from Penn State, and you think, okay, this is a guy who's coached exciting offenses. And then when you take a step back and you realize, well, he had Saquon Barkley and all those guys at Penn State, and that's probably why. Then you bring in Mike Leach. You're like, all right, this guy, he knows offense. They're really good. And they really were just a ball control offense that threw it rather than passing it. So Lebby is the guy that you're hoping is probably going to bring that offensive spark to Starkville that they've just never had. State has always been a program. Its best years, they ran the football and played defense. Yeah. And they've never had a guy who just came in here and was like, we're going to light up the scoreboard, and if we lose a shootout, that's what it is. That's what they're hoping the most for from Lebby.
How does his final step, because this is another part of it, like obviously with every new hire, like the figurehead is Lebby, and he'll be the figurehead, but there's so much more to it. And with how expansive college recruiting is now, college football recruiting, college roster management, this, that, and the other, the staff matters just as much as just the head honcho. I'm always curious at how different coaches fill that out, especially with this. Like, I mean, Georgia's getting picked apart left and right here with Del McGee now taking over at Georgia State today. They lose their best recruiter on offense and defense in the same offseason. It's just a brutal time for the sport. But when you look at Lebby's inaugural staff here, do you like it? Does it feel like what a top tier ish SEC staff should be? That he has the right ties in the right spots, or do you think it's still got some work to do and it's still a wait and see on some of these positional coaches?
It's a tale of two sides of the ball. Offensively, I think he put together a really good staff. He brought in guys that had worked with him before that have experience in this offense. You know, last year, Mississippi State brought in an offensive coordinator. They hired all of the offensive position coaches before the coordinator. So you had a coordinator trying to install an offense that none of these guys had ever worked in before. And, you know, maybe I was a little bit foolish in thinking it could be successful. It obviously was not. This year, you've got guys who've worked with Lebby before. The only one who hasn't is Chad Bumpus, the receivers coach, who State kept because he's an alum. He played football here. He's the best recruiter on the staff. State this year signed 3 4-star recruits at the receiver position. J.J. Harrell, who was committed to Tennessee, Stonka Burnside from here in Starkville, and Mario Craver from the state of Alabama. They also got 2 big-time targets in the transfer portal out of that. That's Chad Bumpus doing that. A former all-SEC wide receiver who's a young guy. He's going to be a good recruiter. So I like that side of the ball. I think they're doing a fine job. Defensively, there's a ton of questions. You bring in Coleman Hutzler from Alabama, who's never been a defensive coordinator before. He was co-coordinator at Texas for a season, but he wasn't the chief play caller. Yeah. You bring in a couple of other guys in Corey Bell and Barnes. Like, is his first name Matt? I can't remember his first name. As your secondary guys, and Matt and Barnes is the co-defensive coordinator, so he sort of has that role. But these are guys who weren't at defensive juggernauts at Florida Atlantic and at Memphis. Now Barnes was at Ohio State before that, but again was not the key guy. And it kind of showed this year in the transfer portal. State was not, despite the fact that State needs immediate impact guys. They have starting positions available at an SEC defense. They didn't get a lot of takers in the transfer portal. And
what do you think that is? I
think that's because nobody knows who Hutzler is. I remember this very clearly. When they hired Hutzler, my first words were, who? And I follow college football. I thought I knew some things. I didn't. So he coached at Alabama. Well, I got friends who cover Alabama. Let me text them and see what they say. And their comments were, don't know much about him. Never really talked to him. So if the people who cover the sport don't know him, you're asking a lot of players to, some of these guys only have 1 year left. Do they want to commit to a rebuild with a guy they don't know a whole lot about? Or do they want to go to programs that are already established? And that's kind of where that went. I think, now that being said, I think those guys are making some good inroads in the class of 25 for the high school side. But I think they're going to have to show something, put some stuff on film of their defense playing well before they're going to have success at the transfer portal level.
Did they swing at bigger names at the DC spot and they just couldn't get them? Or was this like Lebby's guy from the get-go?
There was a lot of smoke around DJ Durkin, who ended up at Auburn. But at the time, the way his contract was structured at Texas A&M, it was going to be like a $5 or $6 million buyout, and nobody's paying that for a coordinator. They're just not. So that was the biggest name that I heard connected to Mississippi State. Hutzler, from what I can tell, was a complete shock. Nobody, because nobody had heard of him. He was the linebackers coach at Alabama. Had never been a coordinator before. But Lebby, apparently, I talked to Hutzler a few weeks back. They had some connections with Lebby, and he felt like that he was the right guy for the job. I think one thing with Mississippi State is they need to improve their recruiting profile a little bit. And I'm not saying State can ever be a program that is consistently a top 10 recruiter. I don't think that's possible. But they've been consistently in that 25 to 35 range for like a decade. That's where they were with Mullen, Moorhead, Leach. That's where they are. They'd like to be a top 20 team. And Hutzler has a reputation as a recruiter. So maybe that played a role in it, and they just feel like, hey, he coached under Nick Saban. He should have learned enough to be able to pull this off. But we go back to Mullen. Mullen's first year at State, he hired a very experienced defensive coordinator called Torbush, and it just didn't work. And so the next year he was gone, and it was kind of funny. I mean, Mullen ran through defensive coordinators like the rest of us run through pants. He had, I think, 7 of them in 8 years.
Did he really?
He had. Hold on. He had Torbush, Manny Diaz, Chris Wilson, Jeff Collins, Manny Diaz, Peter Sermon, Todd Grantham. Yeah, 7.
Wow. My memory, I'm like, I just thought Todd Grantham was there like four years.
He was there for 1 season. And
that's crazy. Like, if you asked me off the top of my head,
Mullen,
like Grantham, I would have said Grantham was there for years.
He left with Mullen when they went to Florida. So, so Mullen made a change after his first year as a defensive coordinator. So my guess is if this defense is really, really bad, you might see a change there. But at the same time, this is something I've been saying a lot on my podcast. You look at Ole Miss's the first year Kiffin was there with Lebby. They were, I think, 100 they were dead last in the country in total defense. Dead last in the country. They could not stop anybody. But they won 5 games. That was the COVID year. And I mean, if they had not played a COVID schedule, because they won 5 SEC games. If they had not played a COVID schedule, they probably would have been 8-4 because they scored on everybody. They were the number 4 offense in the country. So I don't know if State's going to be the number 4 offense in the country, but if you have a top 30, top 40 offense, you can have a 90, 100 defense and still win 6 and maybe even 7 games if you can score enough points.
Well, I think a lot of that comes down to the quarterback play, right? Like, so where are they at with the quarterback? Are you feeling good about the quarterback room in 2024, or are you kind of, I don't know about this?
There's some unknowns, obviously. Blake Shapen is going to be the guy, at least to start the spring, coming in from Baylor. He's a guy who's, when he's been healthy, he was very productive over at Baylor. Was part of that team that won the Big 12 in 2021. But he's struggled staying healthy. So that's going to be a big question. I think State the one place they did a really good job in the transfer portal was the offensive line. They brought in 4 guys who are going to compete for starting spots. So they've got some protection for him there. And then behind him is going to be Chris Parson, the redshirt freshman out of the state of Tennessee, who very electric athlete. He was he committed to Mike Leach, and Leach has never had a quarterback like this guy, a guy who can do a lot of things with his legs. And just to show that no freshman quarterbacks played in the SEC last year, Chris Parson was the first team all freshman SEC quarterback. He completed like 5 passes. No freshman quarterbacks played last year, but he was first team. So put that on his resume, I guess. But Shapen will probably end up winning the job. And, State went after some big targets in the transfer part. They wanted to bring in Dylan Gabriel with the connections to Lebby, but he committed to Oregon. They talked to Kyle McCord, who ended up at Syracuse. I think they talked to DJU before he got to Florida State. But they Shapen, and sort of the same thing with Hutzler, came out of nowhere. I was on the air when he committed. It was 5 minutes before the show goes off the air, and this tweet goes through, and I'm just like, what? And so I couldn't really talk about it, but he'll get the job. I feel okay. And this is the thing about Lebby. I look at Ole Miss again. When he took over there and they had Matt Corral, nobody knew who Matt Corral was. Most people thought John Rice Plumlee was going to win that starting job. And those of us here in the state of Mississippi knew it's going to be Corral because they want to throw the football. And I knew Corral had the big arm, but that's all I really knew about him. And 2 years later, this guy was one of the best quarterbacks in the country. His last year at Ole Miss. So your hope
the man can also take a beating. Like Matt Corral, the lasting memory of Matt Corral is like 25 carries against Tennessee and Neyland, obviously with the mustard and golf ball game. But he kept running on 3rd and 7, and he's so small and took so many shots from Tennessee. He kept getting up.
He's tough, and you hope Shapen can be like that too. And Shapen has some of that mobility as well. So. He's done that. He did with Mackenzie Milton. He did it with Dylan Gabriel. He did it with Matt Corral. Every quarterback he's been the offensive coordinator or play caller for has had success. So you hope that just continues with Blake Shapen.
I just wonder too. I mean, when you talk obviously the big thing this offseason was the drama surrounding what happened last year with Will Rogers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered too, when you hired Lebby, my first thought was, would he return? Like, obviously it's been a lot, but I mean, obviously ties in the area. And I mean, Washington's a whole heck of a long way for the family and everybody else, especially with the new Big Ten schedule that Washington will be playing in. Like, maybe he entertains coming back or something like that. Was that ever in play? And would that have been the best case scenario for Mississippi State just because of what Lebby can do with quarterbacks and Will Rogers potentially having a great final year with him?
So for Rodgers, I think what last year proved is that he's a system quarterback, and that if he's not in an air raid style system, I don't know how successful he's going to be, which makes it the decision to go to Washington kind of odd. That's not really an air raid style system. I liked Will, when I had the chance to talk to him, good kid. And I thought he played really hard for Mississippi State and did the best that he could. But I mean, he's a limited athlete. You don't have any threat of a running game with him behind center. And then he doesn't have that big arm that this offense, I think, needs. I think this is an offense where you want to be able to throw the ball 40, 50 yards down the field. And that's just not Will Rogers' game. He's a guy who's going to, look at coverage and find the open man and hit those short passes and drive you down the field. But he's not the guy who's going to, just, hey, I'm just going to chuck it down the field and make a big play here. I thought going back to last offseason that 2023 would be Will Rogers last year at State. Now, my thought in the summer was, he'll have a good enough year and he'll go to the NFL. And, I don't know, he'll be a high draft choice or anything, but that's what he'll do. And about midway through the season, it became clear it's still going to be his last year, but it's because he's just not going to be here any longer. So, I wish Will the best. Like I said, really good kid, and gave his all for Mississippi State, won some big games for the Bulldogs, but there was never a time where I thought he would stay. Even, he hit the transfer portal the day after the Egg Bowl.
Yeah.
So before even Lebby was hired, and I never thought there was a chance he would come back.
We end here, Brian.
Okay.
What are the year one expectations? What do you think is when you look at the schedule now that things are pretty settled? I mean, spring transfers, they don't usually play a significant role for any team. So it's just, I mean, for every, like we had Kamal Hadden, it's probably the best one of the spring transfers for Tennessee. But outside of that, most guys who transfer in the spring, it's just too late in the process and they just don't make an immediate impact. So you have a good look of what it's going to look like for Mississippi State this fall. What do you think is the realistic expectation from fans for Mississippi State this year?
What it should be now, because they're fans and they may just disagree with me, but State has 4 non-conference games that are winnable. 3 of them are group of 5 FCS. 1 is at Arizona State. Now, as having to play another Power 5 team goes, that's not that bad a chore, right? Arizona State's not a great football team. It is on the road. State went to Arizona 2 years ago and won that game pretty easily. They beat Arizona last year in Starkville, which is one of the craziest results of the college football season when you look at it. It's before Arizona changed quarterbacks, but still.
Yeah.
So State can win those games, right? So that's 4. You look at their SEC schedule, they get Arkansas and Florida at home. They beat Arkansas last year on the road in a game that set football back about 10 years. 7-3 was the final score. The game's off. But Arkansas is not going to be I think Arkansas is probably the second worst team in the conference this year behind Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
And then Florida wasn't very good last year. I thought Graham Mertz was good, but they're not a good football team. You get them on the road. That's early in the season when they've already played Miami, and I think they've played Texas at that point. I could be wrong. But they should be 1-2 when they come to Starkville, where State has a really good chance to be 3-0 and have a little bit of momentum. If you win those 2 games on top of the 4 non-conference, you're 6-6 and you're in a bowl game. Everything else at that point is gravy. If you get a 7th win, then man, Jeff Lebby could be getting some Coach of the Year votes, in my opinion. So 6-6, get back into a bowl game. Put together this is a good recruiting year in the state of Mississippi. There's a lot of 4- and 5-star kids here in the state. He's already got his quarterback committed. Got a couple. The top player in the state, Caleb Cunningham, is a heavy Mississippi State lean. Will probably end up in maroon and white. He's a 5-star wide receiver, and I'll tell you, that kid's a beast. He is an unbelievable specimen. So you get a class like that together and you move forward. So just getting back into postseason play should be a reasonable and reachable goal for Mississippi State in 2024.
I love it. Brian, how do the good folks keep up with everything you've got cooking on the radio front this week?
Sure. You can follow me on Twitter at Brian Hadad. And then if you want to check out my work, I'm available at the Thunder and Lightning podcast. You can subscribe on any platform you listen to podcasts on. That's 5 days a week of Mississippi State sports. And I'm also the co-host of Sports Talk Mississippi. 3 to 6 on any SuperTalk channel, the SuperTalk app, available on TV, supertalktv.com.
I love it. Brian, keep up the great work. Thank you so much for the time, and we'll have to check back in again soon.
Thanks, Chase. Anytime, man.